It worked.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, you're live. I'll post it everywhere, but you're live now.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Rachel Dolcine, and I am the chair for the Jamaica Diaspora Worldwide Organization Task Force. And we are live tonight for another of our nonprofit workshop series. Sorry for the delay. We normally start at 7, but we're trying to work out some technical difficulties. And as you heard at the beginning, when Kimon was saying, you're live now, because we were very excited. We finally worked it out. So thank you for being with us. But tonight we have some really great information for you. We're going to have 2 workshops. The first one is going to be facilitated by me. And the second one is going to be facilitated by Mr. Ron Barrett, and he's going to join me around 8 o'clock. Tonight, we're going to cover 2 very important topics as it relates to fundraising. The holiday season is fast approaching. And if you are a nonprofit organization, you should be working on a plan or already have a plan for how you're going to engage folks during the holiday season for fundraising. That's one of the busiest times of the year for nonprofits to fundraise, and you should certainly take advantage of the giving season, right? People are feeling very charitable, they're feeling very cheerful, and so that is an absolute great time to fundraise for a nonprofit. So the focus of tonight's workshops, and next week we have second workshop, the focus of both evenings is going to be on the holiday season and providing you with some strategies and some tips for maximizing fundraising during the holiday season. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Since I started a little late, I want to make sure I get through all the information for you tonight. I have a PowerPoint presentation. If you are part of JDWAT, meaning that you signed up for JDWAT, Jamaica Diaspora Worldwide Organization Task Force, which is the logo on the back of my screen here. So if you signed up for JDWAT on the JDTAN website, you will get an email that's going to have all the PowerPoints from tonight, along with any resources that myself or the presenter, Ron, the other presenter, gives. And they'll be the same for next week. You'll automatically get those. If you are interested in joining JDWAT because you are part of an organization, you founded an organization, you're the executive director of an organization, and you do work in Jamaica or throughout the diaspora, the link for you to sign up on the JDTAN website will be placed at the bottom of this video, and you can just click it and sign up. It will also be placed in the comments and pinned to the top of this broadcast, right? So you can join JDWAT, and then that way you can get emails as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen with you, and tonight I am going to be talking about using online platforms to fundraise. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. Share screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see this. I'm going to make this a bit bigger, get my little self over in the corner, and all right, so using online platforms to fundraise. As I said earlier, I am Rachel Dolcine. I am also a licensed nonprofit consultant, as well as the chair of the Jamaica Diaspora Worldwide Organization Task Force. I do a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, from starting all the way through organizations that have been in existence for decades. I love the work that I do. I'm very passionate about nonprofits. And so being a part of JDWAT is an amazing experience for me, because I get to use my talents, my resources, my education, my experience to help organizations make my homeland an amazing place to be, to live, to thrive, to get educated, and to work. And so I'm excited about this opportunity to serve in this way. All right. So during this workshop, we will cover QR codes. And if you don't know what those are, you will learn about them tonight. And hopefully after learning about them tonight, you will run and you will create some QR codes for your organization. We are going to cover 2 social media platforms. Now, there are many social media platforms, but tonight we're just going to talk about Facebook and Instagram. They are the 2 that I am most familiar with and that folks use the most when it comes to fundraising. And so we are going to cover those 2. And then I'm going to cover 2 crowdfunding platforms. And these are 2 platforms, 2 of many platforms, but these are 2 of several that I've used and that I think are user-friendly for you. And we'll go through them. So both for the social media platforms and the crowdfunding platform, I'm actually going to go to the website and quickly walk you through what the websites look like and what you can do on those platforms. So if you don't have a pen and paper, I would suggest that you grab one really quick so you can make some notes. But when you get these PowerPoints, all this information will be in there. And so you can always, if you didn't get the website or didn't get the names, you can always go back and do that. Okay, so let's get started. So QR codes. What is a QR code? So on the right is a picture of a QR code. And I'm sure that if you have gone anywhere during COVID, from shopping to sitting down in restaurants to a plethora of other places, you had to use, these places were using QR codes, and you had to turn on your phone camera, put your camera over the QR code, and your camera registers the QR code, and then you can go to the website or wherever that particular business has programmed that QR code for you to go. So a QR code is a machine scannable image similar to a barcode, right? Barcode has all the stripes going down. So it's similar to a barcode, but it's in that family of barcodes that can instantly be read using a smartphone camera. So this is a QR code that I created for my consulting business. When you put your phone camera, turn your phone camera on and point it toward this QR code, it's automatically going to enable you to click my website. You don't have to type anything in. You're just using your smartphone, turning that camera on, pointing that camera towards the QR code. You don't have to press the picture button. As soon as you point that camera towards any QR code, not just this one, your cell phone will give you the option to click on whatever link has been embedded in that QR code. And it's fairly easy. I did this today in 2 minutes, right? Really easy. This is a great way to fundraise and to give people who want to donate to you a really quick and easy way to donate to your organization. You can customize your QR codes. You can put your organization logo, as you just saw, add my business logo on there. You can customize the QR code with a link to your website. So when somebody puts their smartphone camera up to your QR code, the link that comes up could be to your website. You can also link to a document or landing page. You can link to a video, or you can link directly to a donation page. It really depends on what do you want this QR code to do. And yes, you can create more than one QR code because you can have QR code for different reasons, right? These are all different ways that you can customize your QR code so that when it's clicked, when people put their cameras up to that QR code, they can get access to any of these. All right, so some QR code resources. So these are 2 QR code websites that you can go to on your computer to create your own custom QR code for your organization. You have QR code generator and QR code monkey. And then there's an app. So if you have a smartphone or an Apple phone and you have an app store, you can actually go and download QR code generator, QR code creator, and QR maker. You can go and download that and you can create your own QR code on your phone. I use my phone a lot. right? I use it for a plethora of different things. I use my phone so much. And so having an app I can download and I can be anywhere. I can be waiting for a client. I could be in bed and can't really sleep. So I'm finding something to do. I could be waiting at an appointment. I can just use my phone and I can create these QR codes. And they are very easy to create, like I said, and you download them like a picture, right? As you would a picture, and then you can post them anywhere. You can put them on business cards. You can put them on your website. You can put them on your social media page. You can put them on balloons. You can put them on anything. If you are sending out thank you gifts, you can put them on cups. You can put them on mugs. You can put them on whatever you want to put them on, so that folks can quickly access whatever information about your organization you want them to. So this is a quick, easy, and savvy way for you to raise money, because you can program that QR code to go directly to your donation page, right? And folks can just with a click donate quick. All right, so here are some basics that I want to cover when it comes to online fundraisers. Sorry, you're hearing that? That's if you heard that, sorry, that's my front door. So online fundraisers and getting started. Any social media platform that you use, or any crowdfunding platform that you use, and we're going to cover those two in a second. So it doesn't matter what social media platform, it does not matter what crowdfunding platform that you use. These are some things that you need to do in order to have a successful online fundraiser. So first, you need to register your organization with the online platform, because for the most part, the platforms that I'm going to show you, you have to be a 501c3 in order to get the nonprofit status, nonprofit approval for these platforms. Some of these platforms will charge you fees and others are free. The ones that are free are only free if you are a nonprofit, meaning a 501c3. And when I say free, I mean that they will not take any money out of whatever you raise, right? So I will cover some social media platforms. Every cent you raise, they send to you. And then I'm going to cover some crowdfunding platforms where you can raise any amount of money you like, but they will keep a percentage of that money for you using their site. It's a very small amount, but still, they keep that out of what you fundraise. None of the platforms I'm going to talk about with you tonight have any upfront costs, right? They don't. They have free options, and you can use those free options to start. So you need to register your organization as a 501c3, as a nonprofit, and they're going to require you to submit some sort of proof. So they may ask you, oh, can you guys still see me? I just got a message, a really funny message. Can you guys still see me? I hope so. I don't know. Okay, hopefully you can still see me. All right. So getting started. So register the organization with the online platform. You need to give your fundraiser a title, a description, a goal, meaning how much money are you trying to raise, and then a date. Now, let me tell you a little something about the goal. One of the tricks that have worked for me, I wouldn't necessarily say trick, but one of the things that have worked for me when I use online fundraising platforms is that I will set a small goal to start. So let's say I want to raise $700. I may start I might start with a goal of $200. When I reach that $200, I may increase it by $100. So my next goal is $300. And I keep increasing it over the course of the fundraiser time until I've reached my $700, right? That seems to be something that works for online fundraising. Now, obviously, you can put the entire $700. That's fine as well. You can put the entire $700 as a goal, But what I have found that really works well, and I've tried it several different ways, but the sweet spot seems to be starting with a small goal. You reach that goal, and then you increase it in increments. And you can decide if it's $50 increments, or you can decide if it's $100 increments. And you can increase it until you reach whatever your goal is. And then a date. There's a start and an end date, right? And normally fundraisers really, on some of the platforms, it can't be more than, let's say, 30 days. In others, you can have a wider, kind of like a wider span, but you need to have some type of date for when the fundraiser is beginning and when the fundraiser is ending. All right, so the actual raising of the money. Some tips. Post updates is so important. Post updates in your fundraiser consistently. Sorry, this is fundraising, but meant fundraiser. So post updates consistently. It can be updates that are related to the progress, the monetary progress of the fundraiser. It could be updates that are related to what is happening behind the scenes, just to get people excited. It could be updates if you have a donor who's given an amazingly large amount and they're okay with you publicly thanking them. So posting updates throughout the fundraiser is important. The updates can also be videos and graphics and memes that you share about the why of your fundraiser, right? So when I go into Facebook, which is what I used recently to do a fundraiser, I'm going to show you some of the posts that I make that's related to the why. Why are we raising this money, right? So consistently, when you do post updates, it doesn't always have to be just the monetary. Videos. Is there a video that your organization did that shows the work that the organization has done over the course of whatever time? Do you have graphics, really amazing pictures that are powerful, that can speak to what you are doing? Memes. Memes are really, really a great way, a picture with a word or a couple of words, powerful, that speak to the why. Why are we raising this money? Why should you donate to this particular fundraiser? I already talked about increase your fundraising goal as it meet each milestone. So as your board is talking about your fundraising plan and how you're going to roll out this fundraiser, I really recommend that you do milestones. So, start with, if your goal is $10,000, you might want to start with $1,000. When you reach that goal, then are we going to increase it by 1,000 or 2,000, right? So you keep increasing those milestones, and as you reach them, you go to the next milestone. It also just makes you feel so much better, like you're actually reaching your goals. Thank every person who donates. Yes, on these platforms, if on Facebook, you can see who donates. On some of the other platforms, the person can choose to be anonymous, right? But you can see the amount. Thank every person that, every person that you can see to thank them. On Facebook, I go through and I thank every person who donates. Thank them for donating. At the end of the fundraiser, make sure that you provide a final amount. Yay, we reached our $10,000 goal, or our goal was $10,000, but we were able to raise $9,000 during our fundraiser. But although this fundraiser is over, you can still give. Like, we are still going to be working really hard to reach that $1,000 goal. So even though the fundraiser is over, providing folks a way to still stay engaged. And it doesn't have to be engaged via giving. The engagement could be, check out our website. The engagement could be, consider becoming a volunteer. The engagement can be, next year when we have this really large fundraiser, consider being an ambassador, consider being an affiliate, consider being someone who helps us fundraise during this amazing fundraiser. And then tax receipts. For Facebook and Instagram, you do not issue tax receipts. The receipt that is issued by Facebook and Instagram, that's the receipt the donor keeps. So the organization I started, we do not issue receipts for Facebook fundraisers. The other thing about social media fundraisers, like the Facebook fundraisers, you get no information on the donor. No email address, no mailing address. All you get is whatever Facebook name that they've used. So there's no way for you to issue a receipt anyway, but because the money is not coming directly to you, it's going to Facebook. You do not need to give a receipt for that. Facebook issues the receipt for that, right? One of the things that I do though, because I think it's important to build a donor database, right? So even if someone gives on Facebook, I will send them a message and say, thank you so much for donating. We would love to keep in contact with you. If we are sending donors a special gift, a magnet, a calendar, whatever the case is, I'll say, we would love to send you one of our thank you gifts. May I please have your mailing address or your email? I tell them the reason why I'm requesting their email. And they can either say yes or no, they can say sure. Or they could say, no, that's okay. I prefer not to get any emails. And that's fine too, or anything from the organization. That's fine as well. But don't miss out on the opportunity to grow your donor list by asking folks on social media when you fundraise for their contact information. Right? For the other two, rally.org, for rally.org, we issue receipts. Because, and I'll show you with Rally when we get there, because the money comes directly to us. It doesn't go to Rally, right? It's issued directly to us. We can put the money that we raise in Rally, we can deposit directly into our bank account from Rally, and we get all the donor information. You can actually set it up to collect whatever data you want to collect that people will fill out when they're making their donation. Now they can choose to be anonymous on the Rally website where folks can't see that they've donated, but you can get information. So Rally is also, crowdfunding is also a great way to build your donor list. Make sure you are collecting all that information to grow your donor list. All right, social media. So let's get a little specific here. Facebook. So these links worked when I tried them earlier. So hopefully the technology gods would be good to me. All right, so I'm going to go to my Facebook page here, and I'm going to walk you through a fundraiser. So I am now on my page, and it looks a little different. Here we have fundraiser. It looks a little different, right? So on Facebook, you can do a nonprofit, or you can do a fundraiser through personal fundraisers. I believe that personal fundraisers, they will take percentage out for doing that. For nonprofits, they do not take a cent. Facebook gives you every single cent that you raise, right? So when you are going to create a fundraiser on Facebook, it gives you the option. Do you want to do one for a nonprofit or do you want to do a personal? We want to raise money for a nonprofit. You can search. Remember when I told you at the beginning, make sure that you register with the social media platform as a nonprofit. Because when you register as a nonprofit, anyone who wants to raise money on your behalf, so this is my personal page, I can go and raise money on behalf of any organization. Right? Any organization at all that is a nonprofit. You just start to type in their name, right? So the organization I started, the Joseph and Vera Douglas. Right? Comes up, click it. And here is now the fundraiser page, my fundraiser page for the Joseph and Vera Douglas Family Foundation. Now, when I raise this money for Joseph and Vera Douglas Family Foundation, the money doesn't come to me. The money automatically goes to the nonprofit. Why? Because Joseph and Vera Douglas Family Foundation has registered with Facebook. Facebook has all their information, mailing address, EIN number. If Joseph and Vera Douglas wants Facebook to direct deposit the money in their bank account versus sending them a paper check, they have set all that up already with Facebook. So all you have to do is just raise the money, right? So you're going to get a fundraising page here, and you can obviously change a nonprofit whenever you're ready. So Network for Good is who distributes the funds. And normally the organization would get the funds between 45 and 75 days after the fundraiser has ended. So make sure you're calculating that. Make sure you're calculating that when you are doing fundraisers, social media fundraisers. Make sure you're calculating that time. So here you put how much money you want to raise. You can change this amount. You can change this amount as many times as you want throughout the time of the fundraiser. Once the fundraiser has ended, obviously you can't change anything, but you can change this amount as many times as you like. You can select the currency, right? So if the organization is overseas or in a different country, right, you can change the currency. The end date, you can also change this. I've changed end dates a couple of times as well. So you can go in and you can change the end date. Facebook gives you, and Instagram is a similar format, right? So they give you a title, but you can change this. All this is editable. And then why are you raising money? Here is where you really tell the story. And we talked about nonprofit storytelling before, but this is really where you get to tell the story. You get to engage folks in why they should give to you. Because there are millions, thousands and thousands, I should say millions, about maybe 2 million, I guess it's millions, about 2 million organizations in the US, and probably a lot more since COVID, believe it or not. Anyway, I digress. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of organizations, many who are doing similar work as you. Why should I give to you? This is where you get to tell that story. Remember where I talked about updating? That's why updating, having videos, having pictures, having memes, all that stuff is so important to engage people. You can have a cover photo, so you can either choose to have a photo, a generic photo that Facebook provides for you, or you can actually upload your own, right? So I'm gonna keep everything the way it is right here, only because I'm showing you what it is, and then we're gonna hit create. Simple, 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 right? So congratulations, my fundraiser has been published, yay! Now it's time to raise money. And Facebook gives you some suggestions. Instagram is very similar. Now on Instagram, and I'm not gonna cover Instagram today only because of time, but Instagram and Facebook are connected, right? But you have to register separately with Instagram. Instagram has a different vetting process for being approved to be a nonprofit organization and to raise money on Instagram. So you have to register to raise money with Instagram as well. So invite friends, share your fundraiser, and donate. I always donate to my fundraiser, even if it's just $5 to get it started, right? Research shows that if you donate, if you donate to your fundraiser to get it started, a fundraiser where someone has already contributed, whether it's you or someone else, let it be you. Let your name show that you've donated $10. People will commit because they see like, okay, Rachel has already donated to her own fundraiser. Let me support her. Let me support it, right? Charity starts at home, and you have to give by example. You cannot ask folks to give to a cause that you are not willing to give to, that you are not willing to commit to financially. Boards who are not committed to giving out of their pockets to support the organization for which they have responsibility are not successful fundraisers. I will tell you that. They're not. They're not successful fundraisers. They're also not going to be successful at getting sponsorships or even getting grants, because a lot of folks want to know, you're asking me for money. What is your board giving? What does your board giving look like, right? So that's really, really important. Now you can choose not now, which we're going to choose just for the sake of getting through this. You have a goal, right? So it will track it for you, how many days you have left, your progress, how many people have donated, how many people have you invited, how many people have shared. So it gives you a lot of information. This information that's here is information you can use as part of your nonprofit storytelling. So at the end of the year, or the next time we do a fundraiser, you can say the last time that we had a Facebook fundraiser, 200 people donated and we had 500 shares, right? These numbers are important and should not be ignored, right? As well as the amount, how much you raised on Facebook, all right? So it gives you suggestions. Sorry, I am scratching my nose. I'm really hot, and when I'm hot, my nose itches. I'm sorry, but you know, it's me being me. It also gives you options for who to invite, right? So this is It also gives you a Facebook fundraiser link that you can share. And then this is where you can provide updates as well. All right, so this is a Facebook fundraiser. Very simple to pull together, very simple to do. And anyone can do a Facebook fundraiser. Anyone can do a Facebook fundraiser on behalf of the organization. Obviously, it would have to be someone connected to the organization. And the great thing about the Facebook is any money that someone raises on behalf of an organization comes to the organization. So no one can fundraise on Facebook on your behalf and you don't see the money. You're going to see it's going to automatically come to you. All right, crowdfunding platforms. What is crowdfunding? What is a crowdfunding platform? So it's a way to raise funds for a specific cause or a project, and you're asking a large number of people to donate, usually in very small amounts during a short time or a few months. Now, folks can crowdfund sometimes because they're starting a business, or they want to launch a new product, or they want to launch a new fashion line. So they'll crowdfund because we need $100,000 to launch our clothing line, right? So they will do a crowdfunding where there are hundreds and hundreds of people that they're asking maybe to give $10, right? So crowdfunding is really great for building a donor list, but it's also a great way to engage potential donors. All right, so one of my most favorite crowdfunding platforms is Rally. I've used Rally many times to do fundraising. It is very easy to use, and I'm gonna kind of quickly just talk you through Rally and how that works. All right, so this is my actual page, and we're going to sign in because I really want to show you actually, right? So this was, I don't remember which year this was. And this is one of the years, well, I'm not going to go down to kind of to show people's info, but this is, I forgot which year we did this, but the goal was $10,000 that we had on Rally. And once again, when I told you that I've learned, so if I was doing this again now, I probably would start in smaller increments. When we did this fundraiser, I think we were a pretty new organization. So we didn't meet our 10,000 goal on Rally, but I believe this particular year, we raised like $6,000 combining, like between Rally and everything else, raised about $6,000. So that's another thing, right? Is when you diversify your fundraising options, I can give a fundraising goal of $1,000 on Rally. I could do a couple of Facebook fundraisers and enough other ways of bringing in money. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And when folks see a small, when they see a small goal, they think they can contribute. Oh, they're trying to raise $1,000. Okay, I can give. They feel like their $10 will make a bigger difference. If you have $1,000 goal, then a $10,000 goal. It's just psychology, right? When we reached that $1,000 goal, if I was doing Rally, if I was doing this back several years old now, I would then increase it to $1,500, or I would increase it to $2,000, right? And then when we reach that goal, I keep increasing it as well. So Rally, similar to Facebook, you can post pictures, you can post updates, but one of the things that Rally has, and this Rally is started by the organization, right? So your organization would start a Rally fundraiser. You can encourage folks to become a fundraiser, right? So what does that mean? That means that Rachel is supporting the JVD Foundation, and so I am going to become a fundraising, a friend or affiliate, and I'm going to get my own fundraising page where I can post information and post to my friends as to why I am raising this money for JVDFF. When I send my friends my link, which will have my personal message, which will have like, hey, my goal is to raise $1,000. I need y'all to rally behind me, rah, 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 and I need you to help me raise this $1,000. And here's why. you're speaking directly to your family, your friends, your co-workers, right? So you're speaking in a way that the organization may not be able to speak to the general public. So you get your own, you become a fundraiser, you set your goal for $1,000, you send it out to all your folks. When people donate using your link, it still registers with the organization. So the money is not coming to someone who is deciding to be a fundraiser. The money still goes directly to the organization. However, it allows individual folks who are part of the organization to say, you know what, I am really passionate about JVD Foundation. I may not be able to volunteer. I may not be able to go on a mission and action trip, but I can help them raise $500. I want to raise $500 in my network for JVDFF. This is a great way to engage folks who may not have a lot of time for the organization, but they want to give back in some way, right? So they can choose to become a fundraiser. They get their own unique fundraising link that they can send out to their peoples, and they can update their folks. Just like you can update your page, they can also update their folks as well. I see Ron is coming. Ron has come on. Hey, Ron, I am finishing up my presentation, so I'll be with you shortly. One of your, something must be unmuted because they're hearing me, but I'm still just seeing you on here, I think, on my screen. So this is a great way for to get folks involved in fundraising. Is crowdfunding and a rally is one of them. Then you have Give. I can never Give Lively. Hi, Ron.
Hello, hello.
Hey, I'm finishing up I'm almost done my my presentation, and I'll toss it over to you.
Sure.
So Give Lively is another great crowdfunding link to use. I sit on the board of Fostering Change Network, and this is the Give Lively page, right? And you can donate. As you can see, they have small increments. So if someone wanted to give $5, and beside each increment, they tell the potential donor what impact that dollar amount is going to have, right? So you can decide to give one of these amounts. You can decide how often. Now, I would say that recurring donations should be a goal of your organization, to get donors who give on a recurring basis. It's great to start with one-time donations. That's certainly how you build a relationship and how you build credibility with donors. But recurring donations are a great way to keep those donors who've been giving for a while. If someone gives every year for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, I think it's okay to have that conversation about becoming a recurring donor. Once again, I want to fundraise for this. So with Give Lively, someone can decide that I want to raise money on behalf of the Fostering Change Network or your organization, and they can create their own fundraising page, right? And the funds that are raised through this person's fundraising page, like I created my own separate fundraising page because I'm a board member, right? So I created my own personal fundraising page. So that is a fundraising page that I send out to all my friends, my family, my coworker, my colleagues. When my coworkers and colleagues give, those funds don't come to me. Rachel doesn't get to go to Jamaica on a wonderful vacation with this donation fund. It goes directly to FCN Foundation. So that's the wonderful thing about these fundraising platforms, is that you don't have to necessarily worry about the funds going astray, right? They are set up so that the organization gets the funds that are raised. All right, so Q&A. I guess Ron came on at a perfect time. Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? I am going in the live chat on YouTube to see if there are any questions. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see. You can see just me and Mr. Barrett. So I don't see any questions right now, but I am going to keep checking to see if anyone has any particular questions for my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ron so he can get started, and then I will go back to the questions after Ron is done, and we can both take questions from whoever's watching. So as the questions are posted, I can kind of pitch them to Ron if it's a question for him, or I can answer them. We can both answer questions around fundraising. So if you have a particular question around that as well, don't be surprised if either one of us or both of us provide some type of answer for that. So I am going to go ahead and briefly introduce Ron, and then I will turn it over to him. So I'm going to go ahead and all right, so Ron, I have given you special powers so you can share your screen once I get past.
Okay, thank you.
Introducing you. You can, I've given you your superpowers for the evening. All right, and funny enough, Ron, my maiden name is Barrett, so who knows?
No relation.
Related in some way.
Maybe somewhere.
Yeah, my maiden name is back. So Ron Barrett is a VP of Nonprofit Services at Cogency Global, a professional registered agent company. Mr. Barrett developed a comprehensive suite of nonprofit products and services that Cogency currently offers to legal, accounting, and nonprofit clients. He is the author of Nonprofit Fundraising Registrations, which I still need to get, NOLO's 50-state digital guide, and he will tell you what that is and how it's helpful and useful for you, has authored numerous articles and has presented public and in-house CLE and CPE seminars on state charitable registration requirements around the country. Mr. Barrett is also a Standards for Excellence Institute licensed consultant, like myself. He is a founding member of the Nonprofit Alliance, a member of the Nonprofit Advisory Board, a current member and former president of Capital Toastmasters in DC. Oh my, so I'm glad he wasn't here when I was doing all my ums. And is the president of the Ellicott City Rotary Club. I am so very happy to have Ron here tonight because the topic that he is going to cover around charity registration is so very important. As I have done my nonprofit work and worked with so many nonprofit clients, this is an area in which there is so much struggle in the nonprofit community, not just to get it right, but to stay in compliance. And this is so important because we know that fundraising, right, is really important to nonprofits. It's something that we do and something that's important to the mission, to our missions, because no money, no mission, right? So we know we need the dinero, but we got to do it right and make sure that we are in compliance. So Ron is going to share tonight, that's his area of expertise, and he's going to share some information with us about what those expectations are and how do we stay on the good foot when it comes to our charity registration. This, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, he's going to focus on the US, even though I believe that Cogency does work in other countries and he can speak to that, I think, I believe, but I think he's focusing on the 50 states right now. If he'll have his contact information, and I'll be sending out his contact information along with his PowerPoints. If you are in another country and you have questions, you can send them an email to see if they kind of offer what is needed in whatever country you may be in. But the presentation tonight is going to be, I believe, if I'm correct, focused on the US. Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm gonna pass the virtual mic over to Ron.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel. I really appreciate that kind introduction. And I never will criticize people for ums and ahs and so's and likes, but feel free to do that to me, because as a Toastmaster, I shouldn't be doing that very often. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. As Rachel mentioned, I authored a book. It's a page turner, I'll have to warn you, Nonprofit Fundraising Registration, NOLO's 50 State Digital Guide. And I like to describe it as 315 pages of everything you wish you never knew about that subject. Because once you know it, you can't unknow it. And but it is important. It is an important subject, and increasingly more important here in the U.S. States are paying more attention to registration requirements, with digital fundraising really kind of coming out of the back seat and going to the forefront during the pandemic. It was already making incredible gains versus direct mail and other types of more traditional forms of fundraising. But with newer nonprofits, sometimes it's the only thing they know: online fundraising and digital fundraising. And so my talk tonight will focus what is the impact on your fundraising registration requirements when you're digitally fundraising, which means you're fundraising across state borders potentially just by being online, and maybe even nationwide. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Or Rachel, can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay, let me, okay, here we go.
There we go.
Great. And is that appearing properly, or is it, I might have to, I have two screens, so I might have to swap it out.
Yes, that's perfect now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me on that. So yeah, fundraising compliance in the digital age is what I would like to talk about tonight. Just a quick overview. If charities are soliciting, whether it's like the more traditional direct mail or email or phone calls or in person, online, etc., most states in the US have a registration requirement and a renewal requirement. There are many types of organizations that are exempt from the registration requirement. It's usually in certain segments, and sometimes it's based on the size of the organization. Some states have a lot of different exemptions and some have very few. And so it is important to check for exemptions that are available so that you don't needlessly register in a state where an exemption might be applicable. I'll talk about online filings briefly and efforts to simplify this process and how fundraising digitally and online impacts your need to register. And then I'll briefly close with renewal requirements and the consequences of not doing this. So we'll jump right in with the charitable solicitation and registration requirements. So I'll just go over some quick FAQs. Charities that are asking for any kind of a donation, whether it's monetary or in kind, it doesn't matter. If they're asking for something of value, a donation that is for a charitable purpose, they're required to register. And so charitable solicitation registration is a state requirement in most states to register once you start soliciting a donor in another state. And presence or nexus is not required in that state. So just phone calls or emails or letters directed towards donors in other states is sufficient for the registration requirement. It's generally required because it's the law. There are organizations that, aside from the law, see it as a reputational risk to solicit while not registered in other states. They don't want to be the subject of a news story or some negative report about them soliciting while not being registered. And for the most part, that doesn't happen a lot, but I have seen it happen, and I have seen organizations have to scramble after the fact and do damage control. And so it is something that, though it doesn't happen frequently, it is out there. Registration should occur prior to solicitation in a state, and that's true in all states that require registration, with one notable exception, that being California. You can solicit in California while unregistered until you receive a donation. And once you receive $1, that triggers the need to register. In terms of who must register, charities that are soliciting, but also for-profit fundraisers. So professional fundraisers, fundraising consultants, commercial co-venturers, which promote charitable sales promotions of for-profits, products or services, and team up with a nonprofit to pay a percentage to the nonprofit as a result of that charitable sales promotion. All of those are also required to register in states. And it varies in terms of, for professional fundraisers, it's 43 states, fundraising council, it's 31 states, and commercial co-ventures, it's 11 states. In terms of where it's required on the state level in the state office, it's typically the Secretary of State's office or the Attorney General's office. Sometimes it's a consumer protection office under one of those two offices, but it's required in up to 37 states typically. There are a few states, and I'll show you in the next slide, that have some limited registration requirements, but generally, if you're soliciting in all 50 states, there's typically a registration requirement in about 37. And one important differentiation that I'd like to make is the difference between corporate registration and charitable registration. So when a charity or a business, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, is conducting business in a state, say they have an office or employees or assets or buildings or contracts or sufficient nexus in a state such that it constitutes doing business from a legal perspective, they need to qualify to conduct business in the state. And that's not what this is. This relates only to fundraising, to solicitation of donations from potential donors in a state. And fortunately, most states don't say that solicitation by itself constitutes doing business. So in most states, you don't have to do both unless you're actually conducting business in a state and soliciting in a state. If you're just soliciting in a state, typically in most states, it doesn't require that corporate qualification or corporate registration. So it's just something to keep in mind, to keep very separate. So this map depicts where registration is required in the US, where it's not required at all. The green states don't have any registration requirement. And so what that means is you can solicit in those states to your heart's content and not have any registration requirement. Now you notice that there are some of the smaller states in terms of population, but at least you know you don't have to register in the green states. The red states require registration if you're soliciting. Arizona only requires veterans organizations to register, same with Texas, and then Texas adds to that law enforcement and public safety organizations, whereas Louisiana only requires registration if you use the services of a professional fundraiser under contract, that is an outside paid fundraiser. If you don't use an outside paid fundraiser, then you can solicit in Louisiana without being registered. And then Missouri is a bit strange in that they have a charitable solicitation statute and a registration requirement, but they exempt all 501c3 organizations, which is really odd. All that's required is a one-time email with a copy of your IRS determination letter attached to Missouri, and they exempt you from anything in the future. So Louisiana and Missouri, you can add to those green states if you don't use professional fundraisers and you're a 501c3 organization. Same is true with Texas and Arizona if you're not one of those limited types of organizations of being a veterans organization or a law enforcement and public safety or veterans in Texas. So you can add those states to the states where you don't need to register. So I've mentioned on a few occasions exemptions. They're typically industry-based. Think hospitals, colleges, universities, educational foundations, houses of worship, but the list goes on from there. There's many other types of exemptions. In some states, museums are exempt, in others, zoos, aquariums. We see a lot of membership organizations being exempt if they limit their solicitation to members. So there are a lot of different exemptions, and it does vary from state to state. So you do want to look into that. If it's a typical nonprofit, though, that doesn't fit into any one of the broad categories of exemptions, you're typically looking at registration requirements in up to 37 states. The catch is, though, is that In some of the states where an exemption is available, the state wants an application for exemption to be filed. And that's usually just one and done. Once you file that application for exemption from registration, from charitable solicitation registration, and that's approved, nothing further is needed unless something changes. So that's the catch, generally speaking. Move on to the next section, talk about online filings and efforts to simplify the process. Most states, fortunately, will allow either by it being required or available for online filings of these registrations. And that, in some respects, makes it easier because you're not cutting checks to the states, you're paying by credit card, you're not mailing documents to the state or tracking down signatures frequently. Sometimes you are, and you have to upload the signature page. But it makes the process a bit easier in that it's all online. The thing that makes it difficult, though, is that you have to deal with multiple state online systems, and they're quite different from one another. Some are very easy, others are very cumbersome. Some involve just you filling out paperwork or online forms. Others require automated emails that are sent out. Hawaii and Mississippi come to mind, to the signers that then need to review what was input and then sign off on the filings. So it's good news that these filings are going digital in terms of workload, but it's a lot of work because there's a lot of systems to learn. There fortunately are a couple of initiatives historically that have tried to ease the burden. There is a unified form. It's called the Unified Registration Statement. There's a couple of downfalls with it, though, and that is that it hasn't been updated since 2014, and the instructions likewise haven't been updated. And the problem with that is that if you follow the instructions online for the URS, all of your filings will be rejected, all of them. So that's a big negative. Unfortunately, what you really have to do is you could use it, but you'd have to look at the state forms and the state requirements on the state website. But by the time you've done that, its utility is lost because it's just not up to date, and it's not made for somebody that's not familiar with the process and the actual requirements in a state. Mostly, again, because the instructions state by state are not kept current. The other reason it has limited utility is that many of the states now don't accept it. They used to, but they don't because they favor online filing. And so though this initiative was quite popular when it first came back out in the 90s, in the early 90s, it's been waning ever since. And I think the days of the URS are seeing their final days really. In the next 5 years, I think it'll go away altogether unless it's updated or revamped substantially. In terms of a single portal, I frequently get questions about, with all the digital technology out there, why do the states not get together and form some sort of a national online filing portal where you can enter information once and all of the states get what they want in terms of fees and paperwork and reporting? Or I keep saying paperwork, but what I mean generally by that is that certain documents will need to be uploaded when filings are made, such as your 990 or audited financial statements. When you're initially registering, they want to see copies of your bylaws and articles of incorporation. They want a copy of your IRS determination letter, et cetera. And so there is a single portal system, but it's been in the works for 10 years, and they only have 2 states on it, Connecticut and Georgia. And those are 2 of the easier states to file in online on their own online filing systems. So it has a very little utility to it. The original intent more recently over the last 3 years has been to add additional states and cohorts. The second cohort was supposed to launch in early 2019, and that never happened. And for the last 2 years, there have been no updates. So there's really nothing going on with this. Maybe post-pandemic, it'll be picked up again, but unfortunately, it's not looking good for the simplification of this. So one of the questions I very frequently get is, registering in 37 states, that's way too burdensome, way too expensive. What can we do to limit the registration filings that we do and kind of try to apply or try to comply with the letter of the law? But the way I like to describe it is this last bullet point down here, drive 55. In other words, I want to drive 65, knowing that I'm breaking the law that says I'm supposed to go 55. But at the same time, I don't want to do anything crazy or ridiculous. So what can I do to mitigate my risk, so to speak? So I'm willing to go a little bit over the speed limit, knowing that, hey, if I don't register in Alaska because I sent one email to one donor, which that would be required under state law by Alaska and every other state's standards, unless an exemption applies. And so the thinking is like, is there a way that we can be strategic about this? This is a way that we can inject some business and or analysis into it, or risk mitigation into it, so to speak. And so one of the things that I usually say is well, first you want to register in your state of domicile, where you're located, if that's one of the states that requires registration. At the very minimum, you have to start there. And I don't think that's negotiable. If you're not registered in the state where you're located and you're soliciting and you're not exempt, you really should start there. Come into compliance in your home state. But then after that, if you're in a tri-state area like we are here in Maryland, where I'm coming to you from, with Maryland, we call it the DMV area. It's DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And if you have events and donors or board members or officers or employees or volunteers in neighboring states, and they're putting the word out about your organization, or if your donor list includes addresses or emails in those states that you know that they're in neighboring states, then you might consider those states as well for registration. As I had mentioned earlier before, just an email to Missouri and you're exempt there. So if you have donors there, you can solicit all you want, along with the other green and light blue states on that map that I told you about. So when you add all that together, say your state of domicile, so a few neighboring states, Missouri, and the 13 other states on the map where you can solicit while being unregistered, you're already getting up to a good number of states. But then what can you do after that? A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll look at their donor lists in terms of the number of donations and the amount of dollars, and look at it from a geographical perspective. And so they might just create a simple report by state of the number of donors in the state and the amount of total dollars. It's just that little bit of information, and then basically register where the money and the people are. An example might be, okay, well, we have a lot of snowbirds that go down to Florida, and we have a lot of donors that actually send us money from Florida, and we solicit in Florida. And Florida, by the way, happens to be a very aggressive enforcement state. They are quick to fine charities that solicit when unregistered. And so you might say, okay, well, we got a significant amount of money, or we have a significant amount of donors in Florida, let's register there. Whereas you might say, well, in North Dakota, we hardly have anything. We don't have anything. Maybe we're sending a couple of emails to 2 donors in North Dakota, and you just decide, okay, well, that's de minimis, and we're just not going to register there. So that's where you're injecting some of that risk and your tolerance for risk. And I kind of, again, equate it to not doing the speed limit, because technically you're breaking the law if you're soliciting in a state where you're unregistered. The only thing I would mention is to temper all of this with a little bit of consider the embarrassment factor. You don't want to be the subject of a negative news report. You don't want to embarrass any of your officers or directors or volunteers that might be soliciting on your behalf and out there soliciting on your behalf in their state if it's different than your domicile state. So you do want to just keep that in mind. So what's the impact of digital fundraising on charitable registration? And you'll find that you get a lot of differing answers in this respect. Some organizations will say, if you have a donate now button, if you're fundraising online, there's no way around it. Technically, you're soliciting in every state because donors can see it from wherever they are, and therefore you need to register nationwide. Others say no, it isn't an active solicitation. People are finding you. They're going to your website. You didn't solicit them, and therefore you don't have to register in any state. And I argue that both of those points of view are, in fact, not correct, and that it's actually somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit gray. And the state officials in the early 90s, or actually late 90s, got together in Charleston, South Carolina to address this. And what they basically addressed was, hey, the internet is disrupting fundraising. We need to create some sort of a guidance for charities and registration and their registration requirements. And they came out with a document a couple of years later called the Charleston Principles. And the Charleston Principles basically say that if you have a static website and you're not asking for donations on the website, say it's just an informational website, which, you know, back in the late 90s, a lot of the websites were like that. They weren't very interactive. They were kind of like an online brochure. But back then, there were static websites, and people and charities weren't soliciting online. And so they basically said, if that's the type of website it is, there's no registration requirement. However, they went on to say that if it's interactive, if it has the ability to make a donation online, or you're directing people to make a donation offline, or you're targeting people within a state for donations, that you may need to register. And what I mean by may need to register is, or might need to register, is that they qualified it with, as long as the donations were substantial or ongoing. And in the Charleston Principles, they threw out some numbers, some thresholds as a guide, and that was 50 donations from a state's residents, so donors within a specific state, or $25,000 from state residents, donors in that state. So if you hit either of those thresholds, the Charleston Principles were saying that you need to register. The thing, though, with the Charleston Principles, even though it was created by state charities officials and state attorneys generals, they don't carry the effect of law. The idea was is that the officials would go back to their legislatures and that they would update their rules and statutes to reflect some of the thinking that was in the Charleston Principles. But unfortunately, most states didn't take it up. A few did, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But generally, the Charleston Principles, this is a flow chart that I created in my book, that if you just answer some simple yes/no questions, will tell you if you need to register in a state based on your answers to these yes/no questions. And I don't want to go through this whole chart just in the interest of time, but you'll have access to this via the PowerPoint being shared. And so I encourage you to kind of take a look at that if this is of interest to you in the future, now or in the future. So I'd mentioned a few states did take it up the Charleston Principles, and those states are Colorado, Mississippi, and Tennessee. They did, in fact, amend their rules to reflect some of the principles that were in the Charleston Principles. And I'll go into those very briefly individually. So some of the language that was used in the Charleston Principles appears in their rules, word for word. The only difference is that on the threshold, Colorado defined repeated and ongoing as 50 donations, similar to the Charleston Principles, and 25,000 similar to the Charleston Principles. So they actually took up the exact same numbers. But in Mississippi, they said that, okay, we'll agree with the dollar threshold, but we think it's actually 25 donations would trigger a need to register. And then in Tennessee, they took the other, they went in the other direction and said, no, 100 contributions constitutes repeated and ongoing, whereas we all agree that 25,000 is substantial, and that's our threshold. So what this does in Colorado, Mississippi, and Tennessee, if you have donors there, and you're only soliciting digitally, in other words, you're not sending in letters, you're not calling people, you're not sending emails to people that you know are in Tennessee, you're just soliciting digitally. And so there's many different forms of digital solicitation. There's peer-to-peer, there's Facebook fundraisers, there's your Donate Now button, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're not actively soliciting people and they're finding you through digital fundraising, or even if your champions are finding potential donors as a result of digital fundraising, you need not register in these states until you hit these thresholds. So it creates a system where you kind of need to pay attention, one, to the number of donors, and two, to the number of donations that are coming in. A note about Florida. Florida took a different approach. They didn't take up the language that was in the Charleston Principles, but instead they said that if you have a Donate Now button on your website, we consider that solicitation. And so by that thinking and reasoning, they're basically saying that any type of digital fundraising that has an interactive website such that you are receiving a donation requires registration. It's a bit of a stretch in terms of constitutionality and of the law, but that's what they've done. And they're requiring charities that if they have a digital fundraising platform or Donate Now button or any kinds of digital fundraising, they need to register. And not only do you need to register, but the state also wants you to, on your website, conspicuously display a disclosure statement that is required when soliciting in the state. And so typically a charity that has a website with a Donate Now button might put that disclosure statement on that web page, or they might put a link to a broader model disclosure statement that meets the requirements of all states when soliciting in multiple states. So it's something to keep in mind with. And again, it's kind of important in Florida because they are quite aggressive in enforcement. So a few other questions to consider on this topic. Do email marketing campaigns require state charitable registration when the physical addresses associated with the email is unknown? No. And the reason is because you don't know where those donors are. But you need to be cautious in that if you do find out where they are, say you come to acquire their address or their phone number and you know that they're in a state, or you add them to your donor data set and then you start soliciting them through other means in addition to email and knowing where they are, and sometimes it's not just knowing, sometimes it's that you should have known. If that's the scenario, then it can trigger a registration requirement, especially if you're soliciting via more traditional methods. If it's just digital, it's not email, it's just digital online fundraising, and that's all you're doing, then you're going to want to go back to making it subject to the Charleston Principles. Oh, and one other note about the Charleston Principles, three of the states weighed in on the Charleston Principles and their rules. Most other states didn't. But what most of them do is, if asked, they say that they follow the thresholds in the Charleston Principles. And so you can use that as a guide. You can use that as kind of like a benchmark for other states that you might be tracking. Next question is, how does social media, viral, and mobile fundraising impact the need to register? So I think I've already answered it with what I've said previously. You really don't need to register with these types of digital fundraising unless you are targeting residents in a state, you're sending out direct emails, you're making phone calls, etc. If it's just digital fundraising, you don't need to register unless it becomes substantial and ongoing, repeated and ongoing. And you know where those individuals are donating from the states. So that's when it becomes applicable. If a nonprofit is receiving unsolicited donations from out of state, that is, it is not actively soliciting in those states, does that trigger a need for state charitable solicitation registration? So the situation is a check shows up from a donor in Washington state. Do I now need to register? No, you don't, because it wasn't solicited. It's solicitation that triggers the need to register. It isn't a donation that triggers the need. You can solicit in the state only and not receive any donations, and that does trigger a need to register. It's the act of soliciting that actually causes you to need to register. So unsolicited donations, checks coming in the mail, that doesn't require any kind of attention or registration on your part. Similarly, if you solicit somebody in one state and the check arrives from another state, do you now need to register in the other state where the check came from? No. It's tied to solicitation itself. It's based on where you're soliciting. Last question, if a nonprofit uses a fundraising service that acts as a portal or platform to direct public donations to charities, which of these organizations is required to register? short answer is it depends. It depends on the portal. Some of the portals are for-profit and considered fundraisers. Other portals are nonprofits and considered supporting, kind of like supporting organizations, where they're acting as an intermediary, where they're kind of passing on the donation. They're receiving it as a charity themselves, but then kind of acting in a donor advised or donor directed capacity, where they're then giving that money to the charity that the donor meant it to go to. So in that scenario, typically it's just the portal that needs to register nationwide. But if it's not a nonprofit that's doing this, if it's a fundraiser and they're registered as a fundraiser nationwide, it can trigger a need for the charity to also register. And so you really need to look at the terms of the agreement and the setup and know how that portal is structured. So that's a bit of a difficult question because it does require some actual analysis of the actual portal platform. So we've now reached our final section. We'll talk very briefly about the renewal requirements and the consequences of not complying. So unfortunately, it's not one registration and done. Most states out of the 37 that typically require registration want a renewal. 2 of those states, DC and Georgia, require a renewal every 2 years. So you receive a little bit of a break there, but all of the other states require an annual renewal of the registration. And many of them also require financial reporting, either with that renewal or at a later date if the financials aren't ready. And namely being the 990 and or audited financial statements if you meet the state threshold requirements for the audit. And that's something I should also throw out a little bit of a warning on. You know, if you're at a certain level of revenue that doesn't require an audit in your state, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't be required in another state that has a lower audit threshold. So when registering, you do need to be aware of that. And one of the things I do like to warn charities about is that if you do walk down this road and register in a state, you're making a bit of a commitment to the state to renew ongoing every year, or to withdraw if you're not soliciting in the state anymore. And I would argue that it's better to have never registered in a state than to register in a state and not renew. And the reason I say that is because though the states aren't very aggressive about fining or penalizing charities for not registering, unless they find that you're soliciting while unregistered, they'll typically send a letter to you and ask you to register. In the case of Florida, they just outright fine you $500 and open up an administrative proceeding against your organization. But it's better to have not registered at all than to register and then not renew. And the reason is because the state has the expectation that you're going to maintain that registration going forward. And the penalties, late fees, and fines can go into the thousands of dollars for not maintaining a renewal or registration properly. So a word of caution in that respect, that once you do register in a state, you're on their radar and you want to make sure that you maintain those annual filings every year. If things change, like your name or address or your IRS determination letter, something changes, typically the state's going to be updated quickly, but the law says that you're supposed to do it quickly, but in terms of practicality, the states are happy with just being updated once a year. So if something does change, just update them at your next renewal. In terms of renewal due dates, it's all over the calendar. You literally have to get your calendar out, especially if you're registering nationwide. The reason is because some states have renewal due dates based on when you renewed, and so when you initially registered, and the renewal is due on the anniversary. In other states, it's a statutory date that's just defined by statute. For example, Alaska, if you register now, you have renewal due on September 1, and it's September 1 every year going forward. And so there's the anniversary date in some states, there's the statutory date in some states. Most states calculate the due date based on when the IRS 990 is due, or some number of months after the fiscal year end. So the 990 is typically due 4.5 months after the fiscal year end, unless an extension is filed, in which case it's due to 10.5 months after the fiscal year end. Some of the states follow that exact formula. Others don't. Others require multiple extension filings in order to extend the due date without facing penalties or late fines. And so it's not uniform from state to state. And then once you are filing extensions with the states, it pushes out all those due dates. And so it literally is a practice of keeping track of very careful attention to your calendar. Once you do file, keep in mind that many of the states do have online databases that can be searched to see if a charity is registered and to see if that charity, if it is registered, if it's in good standing with its current registration, and be able to look at documents that were filed with the registration. So you want to keep that in mind. And if you ever do want to look up a charity or your own charity in a state, you can do that in most states on their online database. In terms of non-compliance penalties and failure to register, I mentioned a little bit about that. Typically, it's typically minimal risk at the states in terms of not registering while soliciting. The bigger risk comes in when you fail to renew. Also, reputational risk is pretty significant. I've seen this happen on several occasions, both to individuals in terms of officers, directors, or volunteers, or employees of a charity facing some reputational risk as a result of negative news about the charity that they're working with. And obviously that is true for the organization as well. The states do have a lot of tools statutorily and in their rules to come after charities, but they typically don't, not unless there's something egregious or really bad happening, like there's fraud involved. But if it's just a matter of not being registered and you didn't know you needed to register, most states are just happy to see you come into compliance. Most states won't ask, where have you been? There are a few that do. Pennsylvania is one of them, so be careful there. There are ways to mitigate or minimize any late fee in Pennsylvania if you need to register in that state. But as far as like civil and criminal prosecutions and returns of donations and also the ability to raise funds in a state, that typically doesn't happen unless you egregiously ignore the state's requests for renewals or egregiously ignore their request to register when they have evidence that you've solicited, or if something fraudulent has taken place. They typically don't break out any of these types of things unless something really bad has happened. I'm going to kind of wind down with just some resources to recommend. There's my book. There's a 20% off promo code SAVE20 if you're interested in this. But like I said, it's everything most people wish they didn't know about the subject. It's a state-by-state guide that tells it includes everything that's needed for every state. So it has links to the state websites, the forms, the online filing systems, the registration requirements, renewal requirements, et cetera. So it's really for the do-it-yourselfer who doesn't want to outsource this or pay somebody to do it. The book is a good resource for that, and it's updated every 6 months, so it's current. So all those links are kept current and all of the information is kept current. Some additional resources is the National Association of State Charity Officials. I encourage you to check out their website. My company, Cogency Global, has some helpful blog articles and forms library and various links. One thing that I didn't mention earlier is a tip is do not use the URS filing guide, or actually I think I mentioned that it was flawed and outdated. So just be careful that if you do attempt to do any filings online and to do the filings by yourself, you don't want to use the URS. If anything, feel free to reach out to me and I can give you some guidance if you run into difficulties or problems. So I'll close with some questions and leave my information here while considering any questions that might be out there.
So this is obviously really good information, Ron. I don't know if you wanna stop sharing. It doesn't matter if you want to stop sharing or keep it up. So
Yeah, I
I'm
can stop sharing if you like. One thing that I didn't mention is that Cogency Global does provide these registration services. We also assist with corporate filings and sales tax exemptions and other state filing related services, corporate compliance. But the charitable registration, in terms of the services that we provide to nonprofits, is the largest service that we offer, both for initial filings, renewal filings, and exemption filings. So I did want to just throw that out there, that if you are looking for assistance, that Cogency Global is a company that can help.
Right, and that's a headache-free way, because I'll tell you that one less thing to remember that you need to file every year. Remembering to file charity, you got to file your taxes. There's so many things in some places that's needed. Any kind of support on that, obviously, it's always a win for nonprofits. So I don't see any questions on YouTube. I have a few that came up while you were talking, but sometimes there's a lot of questions on the replay. So I'm going to send you a link to the video as well. So if you see questions that may pop up, if you want to check, or I'll just direct them to you, whatever the case is. So I have a couple of questions that came up. This information is so wonderful, and definitely has pushed me. Now I need to get this, the publication that you have about the 50 state charities. I think that's really important, not just in the work I'm doing as a consultant, but as someone who's actively involved in different boards. I think this is important information to have, because some of the boards have folks from all over, not just in the state where the charity is registered. And what it's sounding like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like if I'm a board member on a board and the board is registered, let's say in Utah, but I'm a board member who lives in Maryland, and I'm soliciting my Maryland folks to give to this particular organization, although it's in Utah, that this Maryland may require that nonprofit in Utah to register in Maryland, because now you're actively, I think Maryland does actually, because it's solicitation. Yes. So you're actively soliciting, your board member who represents you is doing that. And so you need, that organization now needs to register in Maryland because you're soliciting.
Yes. Exactly. And let's throw into this scenario, Rachel, that you happen to be running for public office at the time as well. And your opposition researcher is looking into, and noticing that, okay, you are on the board of this charity. And then they go to the charity, Maryland Charity Database to see if it's registered, and they're not. And now you're seen in public soliciting for donations for an unregistered charity, and You're running for public office. And then all of a sudden you see a hit piece in the news directed against you and impugning your reputation because you're working with an unregistered charity. It just doesn't sound so great. And that scenario actually happened in Ohio. The current Attorney General, Mike DeWine, or the former Attorney General, Mike DeWine, he was running for AG at the time. Opposition researchers noticed that he was soliciting on behalf of a charity that wasn't registered. And so they ran news stories about all that, and it just made him look awful because he was running for AG, which the AG is the top law enforcement position in the state. And here you have him who, and that's the office that handles charitable registration. So it didn't go over too well for his campaign. And now he won, but you don't want to be in a situation like that. And so that's why I do mention that sometimes in terms of the reputational risk, you can do damage to people that are the champion of the organization. So sometimes you want to protect them.
Right. And then of course the organization becomes collateral damage, right? This too, in that it's what he's associated with. So I wanted to get a little bit of clarity around solicitation. Now, obviously, we know the definition of solicitation is, but what counts as solicitation? Now, I know you mentioned if you send an email, if you send a direct email soliciting, if you target a particular folks in a particular state, what are some other common examples of what will be considered solicitation that would fall under a state guideline?
Okay, so a lot of times, the more obvious ones and more traditional ones are telephone calls, letters, direct mail. So you're mailing letters to them. Email, if you know where the email is being received. If you don't, then it's kind of in a gray area. But
Okay.
it probably doesn't require registration if you don't know where those people are. But once you do know where they are, then it requires registration. Some people have questions about grants. So writing for grants, that is solicitation in most states. Some of the funders of grants actually require you to register. Others might not require it, but it might be on their due diligence checklist when considering funding as part of the grant. And so they might, they're going to do due diligence. They're going to make sure that you're a charity in good standing. They're probably going to check your corporate status.
Right.
But in some cases, they might check to see if you're registered in the state where you're soliciting that grant. So I usually say that, look, if it's an important grant, ask the funder if you need to be registered, if that's something that they look at, because if it is, it's going to increase your chances in their eyes. And the fact that you're asking also shows that you know something about the subject. And so I usually say that if you're soliciting for an important grant in a state, that you probably want to register in that state, or at least check to see if there's an exemption, because in some states grants are exempted, but in most they're not. Another area that's frequently overlooked as being solicitation, or they think it's not solicitation, but in many states, in most states it is, and that's corporate sponsorships. So a lot of folks think, okay, well, no, that's really advertising, but it's not, and it's usually not, because it really comes down to how you account for those dollars. Are those dollars being accounted, by your CPA and in your 990 as a contribution? Or is it something other than a contribution? Because it's not program service revenue.
Right.
And if it is in fact, or sometimes it's a portion of that money is being allocated as a contribution in the 990 from an accounting perspective. And because of that, it's solicitation. So a lot of people mistakenly think that corporate sponsorships are not a type of solicitation, and it is in most states. And in a few states, it specifically says it is.
Wow. Okay. So this is so much information you've given. So a practical example: organization uses MailChimp to send out your monthly newsletter. You're updating folks on what's going on with the organization. Then you have a donate button on where you're asking folks, or do you have a particular initiative coming up for which you are raising funds, and you send out a MailChimp to your listserv. Does that fall under the email with a gray area because you may not necessarily know where these donors are located?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't know where they are, and it could be a mix. It could be that for some of them you do know, and so you're soliciting and then subject to registration, and others you don't know, and so you don't know where to register because you don't know where they are. It's a situation where if your fundraising is a hybrid model where you do know where they are because their address and all of their information is in your donor data, and you send it out, and there's a direct appeal in that communication that triggers a need to register. If you don't know where they are, and say you don't have addresses associated with any of them, then it falls into the digital fundraising and subject to the Charleston Principles and the Charleston Principles thresholds for registration. So it creates a scenario where you need to keep track of the number of donations, the amount of dollars.
Okay.
And I do often mention as well, and I don't think thus far, is that if you're sending communications about your organization and about all the good things you're doing and have accomplished and hope to do in the future, and then you say something like, to learn more, visit our website, you say just your homepage, that's not a solicitation. It's only when you go to the effort of saying, to learn more and to give, go to this website, and then that website is the page where your donate now button is. Now it's solicitation. Or even if it's just to learn more and to make a donation and it goes to your website, that's soliciting. But again, subject to whether or not you know where those people are. That's what's going to trigger the requirement to register.
Got you. So the other question I have, because prior to you coming on, I did a presentation on walking folks through some crowdfunding as well as social media options that you have for fundraising. Obviously, Facebook is a beast when it comes to what people using it for fundraising, and they go through they have a foundation that they use to distribute the funds.
Right.
So the funds actually come from that particular foundation versus Facebook itself, which I'm sure they investigated all this. And you mentioned in your presentation that there's a difference between something like that. So it's a nonprofit where the money is being collected and then dispersed to other nonprofits versus a for-profit company who has this platform where you can use your platform to fundraise. They charge a fee for you to do it, but it's not necessarily a nonprofit. So can you give an example? So would GoFundMe, or is there specific platforms that would fall under that category where you would need to find out if they've registered in a state, or you may just need to register in certain states to be safe, or how exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have the names of any off the top of my head that are for-profit. They are out there. I can mention the name of one that is not a for-profit, and that's Network for Good. And Network for Good follows kind of the model that Facebook Foundation follows, in that you can work with Network for Good on the back end for the portal donation. The donation actually goes to Network for Good, and Network for Good is a nonprofit. And then the money is funneled through to your organization through Network for Good in a donor-directed fashion. And so that creates a scenario where you don't need to register because Network for Good is registered and they're the actual recipient of the funds. So when you need to be concerned is when you're not the recipient of the funds and you're using a platform where the money is going to the for-profit, and then the for-profit is then giving you the funds. Because that creates a scenario where you're working with a functional professional fundraiser.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that requires registration on not only the charities part, but also on the professional fundraisers part. And when Network for Good first came onto the scene, some of the states had a problem with it. And they appreciated the fact that Network for Good registered nationwide as a charity, but they also argued, wait a second, you're helping other charities fundraise. And if you read our statutory definition of what a fundraiser, a professional fundraiser is, your organization meets that definition because you're helping other charities fundraise. So a little bit of back and forth between the states and Network for Good, they came up with a solution. And the solution was that Network for Good created a subsidiary, a for-profit subsidiary that is a professional fundraiser. But that professional fundraiser only works for Network for Good. It's their only client. And that professional fundraiser is registered nationwide in all 43 states that require it. And because they set that scenario up, that it's a subsidiary of a nonprofit that is fundraising only for that nonprofit, and obviously other nonprofits benefit as a result, but none of the other nonprofits are working with that for-profit subsidiary, only Network for Good is. And the states and Network for Good, I think they got it from a practical matter, from a fairness perspective. I think they got that model right. There are initiatives in California right now to address all of these fundraising platforms that don't necessarily follow that model, because there are a lot of concerns coming out of California about donor dollars and integrity and honesty in fundraising, and making sure that donations that were intended for a specific charity are making their way there. And they're just a little bit leery about the for-profit ones, especially if they're not registered to solicit as fundraisers. And so there are, California has been trying to pass a statute on this for I think at least the last 5 or 6 years. There is an assembly bill that's being considered now that's actually made some progress. The others kind of died pretty quickly, but this one's actually, it appears to be advancing, and they're actually asking for public comment on that bill, on that assembly bill. So I think eventually something will be done, in that respect, and that California will lead the way and that other states will likely follow.
And that's really some good advice for folks who are using platforms to fundraise, because it's a pretty popular option right now. It's convenient, it's easy for folks to give. That's a really great option. The last question I had is, so some nonprofits use different ways to fundraise. You use PayPal, you use Cash App, just options like those. In what category would those types of platforms fall? So you're using PayPal. I know PayPal has a PayPal Giving Fund, which gives you money that someone made, but you have like Cash App where you can, a nonprofit can, would that be considered a cash donation that you kind of file that way, or would you, what's the?
Yeah, so it's the Wild West.
Okay.
There's not much guidance, especially and it's true of the platforms as well. And you mentioned PayPal, and PayPal actually kind of got on the wrong side of the radar with the states, and they were fined, I think, tens of millions of dollars as a result.
Oh.
And there was a big settlement with several state AGs involved, with PayPal paying many millions of dollars to settle this case. If I recall correctly, I do believe that is the case. I know that there was a settlement.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the exact dollar amount, and it related to fundraising and fundraising compliance, and it related to the state officials having one opinion on the matter and PayPal having another opinion. And it went, I don't know that it was litigated, but it definitely went through the administrative process and ended up ultimately that PayPal was fined quite heftily. Now that's been resolved, and so that they do have a model now that brought them into compliance to the state's satisfaction. And I know that California was looking at that pretty closely as a way to guide their position on these portals, and how to get in there and, one, protect consumers and protect nonprofits and protect donors, while trying to balance the regulatory burden that they're going to be placing on these platforms and potentially on charities when it comes to registration.
And I know there are hundreds of fundraising platforms that exist, and I know of nonprofits who've used some platforms and have a very difficult time getting the funds that were raised or getting access to it, or whatever the case is. And then there are others where you fundraise using a platform and you have complete access. So you can take the money out, you can deposit the money in your bank account whenever you want. Once the fundraiser is done, and they give you a time frame by which you should get a check. Right. So I think really a part of this is due diligence on the nonprofit side, because
Yes.
At the end of the day, as I tell my clients, even when it comes to fiduciary matters for the board, it falls at the feet of that nonprofit. And so making sure that you are educated about even the platforms that you're using, choosing them wisely, and being educated in these matters, so that when you're looking for platforms, you have some questions you can ask if there's a Q&A portion, or you can search through that platform's website to see what are they saying about being registered, what are they saying about access to funds and when you get paid and all those types of things. What are the reviews?
What are the reviews? And are there no reviews? Because if there are none, that's negative by itself sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And if in some places you may have Better Business, running some of them through the Better Business Bureau and seeing,
Definitely.
Looking on social media platforms to see if they have a page and what are people saying, So really a lot of what we talked about tonight, both in my presentation and yours, is really providing you who are watching, who are the organizations, and when you watch this on the replay, with the information you need to make educated decisions, for your board to make educated decisions about the nonprofit's work and practices, because I didn't know is not a legal excuse.
Right.
And the information is, it's really your responsibility to get the information and making sure that you are in compliance as much as possible. If you don't know, as Ron said tonight, if you don't know where someone's donating from, that's different.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that exists that you know. That's very different than some of the things that we're talking about tonight, which is you should know to register in your state and seeking the professional help that you may need to guide you through the proper way to set up a nonprofit so that you're not making some of these boo-boos. This is what these workshops are for. Some of the pitfalls and the uh-ohs and the ouches and the band-aids and all the stuff that happens as nonprofits are doing their work is to help you avoid some of those mistakes.
Yes.
So we are at 2 minutes to 9. Any last comments you have, Ron, before we kind of close out?
Just to throw out there that if anyone has questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to jump on a phone call or a meeting with, whether it's in the development segment or the executive director or with a board member. I do it quite frequently. I do it in the capacity of from a perspective of wanting to help and not wanting to charge you. Although we do provide services relating to this, that only comes into play if you actually decide that you need our services. But in the interim and in the meantime, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and I mean, this information is, some of it I knew and some of it was clarification, and some of it was like, wow, but you're a very, you have a very specific niche in the nonprofit sector, unlike many of us like myself you have several different things that but not necessarily a niche. So this definitely speaks to that.
And sorry to interrupt, but there's niches within this niche that I know.
Well, let me tell you, when you're rattling off, in Vermont and wherever, I was like, oh my goodness, how does he remember all these states and who's what and who's that? I'm like, wow. When you've been doing something for a long time, how long have you been in this particular niche?
So I stumbled into it in 2009 or 2010.
Oh, wow.
When I first started looking into this, I didn't know the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c6. Like the basic stuff, I didn't know anything. But it took a couple of years to kind of get my feet under me. And then I wrote the book, and that led to a lot of other opportunities for me and for Cogency Global. And now I'm among a handful of people in the country that know this as well as I do. I'm afraid to admit.
Well, that's really important, because the nonprofit waters, people think they're shallow, but they're deep. They may look shallow, but let me tell you, you got to know how to be a strong swimmer. Because the waters are deep.
So true.
Very, very deep. So thank you so very much, Ron, for coming on tonight. As I mentioned in the beginning, and then when I introduced Ron, this PowerPoint will be sent out to all the JDWAT members. If you are not a JDWAT member, you can sign up via jdtan.org. So Ron's PowerPoint presentation, along with his contact information, will be sent out to all members. Obviously, if you're watching this on replay, his information is here, and he has made the offer for you to reach out if you or your executive team or board need this information. I would honestly say that all of you should be trying to get him scheduled to speak to your board, because this is information that they need to know. And if you are struggling in any way with keeping up with compliance or trying to understand, do I need to be, what do I do? They provide services that can help you, right? And that's one of the things in nonprofit sector we don't do very well is, this DIY, right? This DIY that we can do it ourselves because we can save some money. In the short term, yes, but as he's explained, reputation and in some places, some hefty fines, as Florida doesn't play. But in the long run, it sets you back. It really, really does. And I tell so many nonprofits this, it sets you back in the long run, right? And so if you need to reach out to Ron or myself, or contact information will be in the message that's sent out. Join us again on September 2nd. We will have our second round of workshops. We were unable to have workshops last week because our speaker was ill. this COVID issues, COVID related. So she will be with us again next week. Sorry, not next week, September 2nd. So September 2nd, we'll be joined by Shalita O'Neill from Grow Charity, and she will be doing a workshop on hosting successful event fundraisers. Shalita has raised millions of dollars for organizations through event fundraisers, and so she'll be giving you some strategies and tips for doing that. Once again, as the holidays are coming, and she has done online event fundraising, so she can definitely speak to that. And then I will follow up her presentation with some holiday fundraising ideas that I've used over the years, that clients have used over the years, that are really simple and can be helpful for you as you are looking at ways to engage, not just donors, but engage your community, because not all the ideas are necessarily fundraisers. They're also fundraisers, right? So ways for you to garner volunteers, way for you to garner supporters, and if you are in your board recruitment season, even a way for you to recruit board members as well. So we'll be talking about some fundraising and some fundraising ideas on September 2nd as well. So I will see you on September 2nd, and have a good evening, morning, afternoon, because I know you're watching from all over the world. You'll be watching. So whenever you watch this, hope you're having an amazing day, and we will see you again on September 2nd. Good night.